My father's genius plan to destroy my mother's life ended up being the best thing that ever happened to her. And watching it all unfold, from the front row, as their only daughter, was one of the most surreal, heartbreaking, and ultimately triumphant experiences of my entire life. Let me take you back to where this story begins. Not the dramatic part, not the screaming or the divorce papers or the emails that blew the whole thing wide open. The beginning, the real beginning. Because if you do not understand where my parents came from, you will not understand how spectacularly everything fell apart. My parents were married when they were barely out of high school. My mother grew up in a small, conservative southern town, the kind of place where church attendance was mandatory. Women were expected to submit to their husbands, and questioning either of those things was tantamount to blasphemy. She was raised to believe that her purpose in life was to be a good wife and a good mother, and that everything else, her own desires, her own ambitions, her own identity, came second. My father, on the other hand, was always ambitious, charming, driven, and completely comfortable being the center of attention. When my mother got pregnant with me at 18, both sets of grandparents marched them to the nearest church and made it official. There was no proposal, no romantic gestures, no choice really, just a shotgun wedding wrapped in the language of Christian duty. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a shrewd businessman. He saw an opportunity in my father's ambition and set him up with a business in a major city. My parents moved shortly after I was born, leaving behind the small town and the familiar faces and the stifling expectations that had shaped their entire lives. Except my mother carried those expectations with her. Even in the big city, surrounded by people who lived very different kinds of lives, she remained the quiet, obedient wife she had been trained to be. She did not socialize. She did not make friends. She did not have hobbies or interests or anything that was just hers. Her entire world was the apartment, the baby, and the husband who was never there. Because my father was never there. Let me be absolutely clear about that. He was a ghost in our home. He left early, came back late, and spent weekends on business trips or at corporate events that did not include his wife and child. He provided financially, I will give him that. We never wanted for anything material. But a child needs more than a roof and new shoes. A child needs a father who shows up, who is present, who makes you feel like you matter. And a wife needs a husband who sees her as a partner, not a piece of furniture. Growing up, I became my mother's best friend by default. She had no one else. We talked about everything, the way a mother and daughter probably should not have to, because a woman should have friends her own age, her own community, her own support system. But she had none of those things, so she had me. And I loved her ferociously. The way you love someone you can see is drowning, but you are too young to know how to save. As I got older, I started pushing her. Gently at first, then more persistently. Make a friend, Mom. Join a class. Go somewhere. Do something that is just for you. It took years, literal years of encouragement. But eventually, she started going to a park near our apartment. That is where she met Rita. Rita was a personal trainer, outgoing and confident, and everything my mother was not. They became friends, and through Rita, my mother discovered the gym. She started working out. Not casually, not a twice-a-week treadmill stroll, but seriously. She found something in the discipline of training that spoke to a part of her she had never been allowed to explore. The strength she was building in her body started spreading to other parts of her life. She stood up straighter. She spoke louder. She started having opinions and expressing them. She made more friends at the gym. Women who invited her to brunch, to book clubs, to movie nights. For the first time in 2 decades, my mother had a social life. She had people who valued her company, who laughed at her jokes, who treated her like a whole, interesting human being instead of someone's neglected wife. And then my father came home one evening and asked for an open marriage. I remember the phone call. My mother was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She told me, between hiccups and broken sentences, that my father had sat her down at the kitchen table and told her he was unhappy. He said she was not meeting his needs. He said he wanted the freedom to see other people, and he wanted her to have the same freedom. An open marriage, he called it. A modern arrangement between consenting adults. My mother, the woman who had been raised in a church pew, who had never kissed another man, who had spent her entire adult life trying to be the perfect Christian wife, was utterly destroyed. She called me in hysterics, and I drove to her apartment and held her while she cried on the living room floor. I told her to divorce him. She said she could not. She did not believe in divorce. She would not be the one to end the marriage. She said those words like they were a physical law, like gravity. She believed them with every cell in her body. I remember sitting in my apartment after that phone call, staring at the wall, feeling a rage so intense it was almost calm. This was the man who had missed my school plays, my graduations, my birthdays. This was the man who had left my mother alone in a city where she knew no one, with a baby she was barely old enough to raise, while he built his career and his social life and his ego. And now, after 2 decades of emotional abandonment, he had the audacity to tell her she was not meeting his needs. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I thought about calling him and telling him exactly what I thought. I picked up my phone 3 times and put it back down each time. What would be the point? My father has never been the kind of man who hears criticism. He absorbs it, deflects it, and reshapes reality until he is the hero of every story. Confronting him would only give him the chance to play the victim, and I refused to hand him that. My father kept pushing. Week after week, he brought it up. He was relentless, the way only someone who has already made up their mind can be. Looking back now, with everything we eventually learned, I understand why he was so insistent. But at the time, all I saw was a man trying to get permission to cheat on my mother. Rita and I had a long conversation about it. Rita, who had gone through her own brutal divorce after her husband cheated on her, saw the situation with the clear-eyed pragmatism of someone who has already been through the fire. She said, if he is asking for permission, he is already doing it. The open marriage is just a way to make it legal. Eventually, after weeks of pressure, my mother agreed. But she had one condition: complete transparency. Everything out in the open. No secrets, no lies, no sneaking around. If they were going to do this, they were going to do it honestly. My father agreed immediately, which should have been the first red flag. A man asking for an open marriage that enthusiastically is a man who already has someone in mind. Here is where things got interesting, and by interesting, I mean where my father's plan started to spectacularly backfire. I helped my mother set up dating profiles. We sat at her kitchen table with a bottle of wine, and I took photos of her and helped her write a bio. She was nervous and giggly and embarrassed, like a teenager going to her first dance. But she was also, for the first time in as long as I could remember, excited about something. My mother looked at the finished profile with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was wonder. Pure, childlike wonder, like she was seeing herself clearly for the first time. The photos I had taken made her look exactly like what she was, a beautiful, strong, radiant woman who had been hidden in plain sight for 20 years. She kept scrolling through the pictures and saying, "Is that really me?" And I kept saying, "Yes, Mom. That is really you. That has always been you." The response was immediate and overwhelming. My mother was, and is, an incredibly attractive woman. She was 39 at the time, but she looked a decade younger. Years of dedicated training had given her an athletic, toned physique that turned heads everywhere she went. Her profile was flooded with messages, hundreds of them, men of all ages, all backgrounds, all falling over themselves to get her attention. She was selective. She spent months chatting with people, getting to know them, being cautious and thoughtful the way she approaches everything. When she finally started meeting people in person, it was on her terms, at her pace, with her in complete control. Meanwhile, my father hooked up with his secretary almost immediately. I found out later that this was not a new relationship, but a continuation of one that had been going on for months, possibly years, before the open marriage conversation even happened. But at the time, all I knew was that my father had one partner and my mother had several, and the imbalance was eating him alive. The transparency rule was killing my father. Every time my mother went on a date or spent the evening with someone, she told him about it afterward, just as they had agreed. She did not rub it in his face or go into unnecessary detail. She simply reported the facts, the way you would tell a roommate about your weekend plans. But even that bare minimum of honesty was more than my father could handle. It was almost comical to watch, if you set aside the decades of emotional damage that made it possible. My father, a 41-year-old man with a receding hairline and a belly he had never bothered to address, was struggling on the dating market. Beyond his secretary, who he already had locked in, other women were not exactly lining up. He was average in every way that mattered on a dating profile, and the charm that had worked on a naive 18-year-old from a small town 2 decades ago did not translate well to a world of women who had options and standards and no shortage of attention. My mother, on the other hand, was thriving. She was getting more attention in a week than my father had received in months. Men were sending her flowers, writing her long messages, asking her out to restaurants my father could not have afforded on his own. She was selective and careful, but when she did go out, she came home glowing. The confidence that the gym had started to build was now being reinforced from every direction. She was wanted. She was seen. She was valued. And my father could not stand it. He started picking fights. Snide comments about her clothing. Passive-aggressive remarks about her schedule. Criticisms of her appearance that were clearly designed to undermine the confidence she had spent years building. He almost called her a terrible name one night before catching himself. Almost. But I was in the next room, and I heard the word form on his lips before he swallowed it. And I wanted to walk in there and tell him exactly what I thought of him. My mother, the woman who had spent 20 years apologizing for things that were not her fault, did not back down. Not this time. When my father started a fight, she stood her ground. When he made a snide remark, she called it out. When he tried to have a conversation about closing the marriage back up, she shut it down immediately. I think that was the moment my father realized he had created a monster. Not a monster in the negative sense, but in the sense that the woman he had kept small and quiet and obedient for 2 decades had suddenly discovered how big and loud and powerful she actually was. And there was no putting that genie back in the bottle. A few weeks after my last conversation with her about it, my father moved out and filed for divorce. He did not discuss it with her first. He just left, served the papers within a week, and was gone. He told his version of the story to both sets of grandparents, conveniently implying that my mother had been cheating on him, leaving out the part where the entire arrangement was his idea. Both sets of grandparents descended on our apartment like an invading army. They came to berate my mother, to shame her, to drag her back into the submissive box she had spent her whole life trying to escape. The scene in that apartment was something out of a nightmare. For elderly people from conservative Southern backgrounds, people who had never once questioned the rigid social order they had been raised in, confronted with the reality that their children's marriage had descended into something they could barely comprehend. My mother's parents called her names that no parent should ever use toward their child. My father's parents accused her of destroying the family. The kitchen table where my parents had once shared meals became a battlefield of accusations and Bible verses and self-righteous fury. But I had screenshots. I had saved every message, every text, every email exchange between my parents about the open marriage. I had the receipts that proved, unequivocally, that this was my father's idea, that my mother had initially refused, that she had agreed only under extreme pressure and with the condition of total transparency. My mother pulled out her phone and showed them everything. And that is when the grandparents turned on each other. My father's parents blamed my mother's parents for raising a daughter who would agree to such an arrangement. My mother's parents blamed my father's parents for raising a son who would suggest it. The apartment became a four-way screaming match between elderly people who could not accept that their precious children had made a mess of their marriage all on their own. And then, like vultures sensing opportunity, the church ladies arrived. Women from the congregation my mother had attended years ago, the same women who had looked down on her for being from a small town, who had excluded her from their social circles, who had made her feel unwelcome in the one place that was supposed to offer unconditional acceptance. They showed up at the door with righteous indignation and judgmental smiles, calling my mother names and telling her she was going to face divine punishment for her sins. My mother, the woman who 6 months ago would have crumbled under this kind of attack, straightened her back, looked them dead in the eyes, and told them to get out of her house. She did not yell. She did not cry. She just spoke with the calm, measured authority of someone who has finally realized that other people's opinions of her are none of her business. The church ladies left sputtering and scandalized, and my mother closed the door behind them and turned to me with the smallest hint of a smile on her face. But here is where the story takes its most dramatic turn. My mother's attorney, recommended by Rita, started looking through the company's financial records in preparation for the divorce. And what she found was staggering. My father had been having affairs for at least 10 years. Not just the secretary, multiple women. He had used company funds, my mother's company funds, because it turned out the business my grandfather had set up was in my mother's name, not my father's. He had been using her money to book flights, reserve hotel suites, pay for luxury vacations with women who were not his wife for an entire decade. There were receipts for everything: airline tickets, hotel reservations, restaurant bills, gift purchases, all routed through the company credit card, all meticulously documented in the company's financial records. My father had not even tried to hide it. He was so confident in my mother's ignorance, so certain that she would never think to look, that he left a paper trail a mile wide. But the worst discovery came from the email server. My father had deleted all of his emails with the secretary before filing for divorce, and he had told her to do the same. What he did not realize was that the company maintained backup copies of all emails on a central server. Every single message was still there, preserved like flies in amber. The emails told a story that made my blood run cold. My father and his secretary had been sleeping together for months before the open marriage conversation. The secretary had grown tired of being the other woman and had started pressuring my father to get a divorce. But they did not want my mother to receive a favorable settlement. They wanted to manipulate her into filing first, which they believed would weaken her position. The open marriage suggestion was the secretary's idea. They assumed that my deeply religious, deeply conservative mother would be so horrified by the proposal that she would immediately file for divorce. It was supposed to be a provocation, a carefully calculated move designed to push my mother over the edge and into a lawyer's office. They never expected her to say yes. When my mother agreed to the open marriage, their plan collapsed. Suddenly, instead of a devastated wife running to a divorce attorney, they had a liberated woman who was discovering, for the first time in her life, what it felt like to be desired and valued and in control of her own romantic destiny. My father was supposed to be the one benefiting from the arrangement. Instead, he was sitting alone in their apartment, seething with jealousy, while his wife went on dates with men who actually appreciated her. The irony is almost too perfect to be real, but it is real, every word of it. My mother's attorneys presented the evidence to my father's legal team, and reality hit him like a freight train. Going to trial would mean a judge seeing everything. The 10 years of affairs funded by company money. The coordinated scheme with his secretary. The emails proving premeditation and financial malfeasance. His attorneys advised him to settle. Quickly, quietly, before any of this became a matter of public record. He fought it for a while, because stubbornness runs in his blood the way water runs downhill. But eventually, facing the mathematical certainty of a catastrophic loss at trial, he folded. He took a payout, signed the papers, and was officially removed from the company that my mother's father had built, the company that had been in my mother's name all along, the company my father had treated as his personal piggy bank for over a decade. That was 4 years ago, for years that have felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday. I remember because my mother called me that afternoon, and for the first time in months, she was not crying. She was not angry. She was not stressed or anxious or overwhelmed. She was calm, peaceful even. She said, "It is over." And then she laughed, this light, free, almost disbelieving laugh, like a prisoner walking out into sunlight for the first time. We went to dinner that night, just the two of us, at a restaurant we had never been to before. She ordered champagne. She toasted to new beginnings. She looked 10 years younger than she had the day my father served those papers. My mother kept everything. The company, the house, the life that she had built on the ashes of the one that was taken from her. She did not want the stress of running the business day to day, so she appointed herself chairman of the board, hired a professional management team, and now oversees the big picture while collecting the profits she had always been entitled to. With her free time, she and Rita opened a boutique gym together. Rita handles the fitness programs and training schedules. My mother handles the business side, the finances, the marketing, the operations. The gym is thriving. They have a waiting list for new memberships. My mother is 43 now. She is in the best shape of her life. She has more defined abs than most people half her age. She has friends who love her, a business partner who respects her, a community that values her. She is casually dating a divorced man who treats her like an equal and asks about her day and does not expect her to shrink herself to make him comfortable. They travel together. They have fun. There is no pressure, no manipulation, no hidden agenda. just two adults who enjoy each other's company. She is unrecognizable from the woman she was when I was growing up. The quiet, submissive, isolated wife who never went out and never spoke up and never asked for anything for herself has been replaced by someone vibrant and confident and fully alive. Watching that transformation has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. As for my father, well, he married the secretary. Without access to my mother's company money, their lifestyle took a significant downgrade. No more luxury vacations. No more expensive restaurants. No more corporate credit card to fund their romance. They live a downsized, average life, which, to be clear, there is nothing wrong with. But for a man who spent 20 years living large on someone else's dime, the adjustment must have been brutal. The boutique gym was actually my idea. Well, partly. Rita and my mother were having brunch one Sunday, and I was there too. And we were talking about what my mother wanted to do with her life now that the divorce was settled and the company was running itself. Rita joked that they should open a gym together, and my mother's eyes lit up in a way I had not seen since she was helping Lily at the playground years ago. By the following Monday, they had a business plan. By the end of the month, they had signed a lease on a space in a trendy part of the city, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. 6 months later, they opened the doors. The waiting list started within the first week. I go there sometimes, to work out, or just to visit. Watching my mother walk through that gym, greeting members by name, adjusting equipment, discussing nutrition plans with Rita, is like watching a completely different person inhabit the body of someone I used to know. She moves with a confidence and purpose that was never there before. She laughs freely. She makes jokes. She has a life that is full and rich and entirely her own. The man she is dating now, his name is Robert. He is a kind, quiet man who brings her flowers and asks about her day and never, not once, has tried to diminish her or control her or make her feel like she is not enough. They are taking things slow. My mother says she is in no rush. She spent 20 years being someone's wife. Now she is learning how to just be herself, and she is finding that she rather enjoys it. I am 26 now. I see my father for lunch maybe twice a year. The conversations are stiff, stilted, and punctuated by long silences that neither of us seems motivated to fill. He still makes passive-aggressive comments about my mother. He still cannot resist the occasional bitter dig about her success or her appearance or her social life. I used to engage with it. Now I just change the subject. His bitterness is his problem. I will not carry it for him. The last time I saw him was about 3 months ago. We met at a diner near his apartment. He looked older than his 45 years. Tired. Worn. The secretary, now his wife, apparently keeps a tight budget, and the lifestyle he had grown accustomed to on my mother's dime is a distant memory. He ordered a coffee and a sandwich and spent most of the meal complaining about his new boss at the job he had to take after losing the company. When he asked about my mother, which he always does, I gave my standard non-answer. She is fine. And then I changed the subject. He knows she is more than fine. He sees the gym's social media posts. He sees the photos of her traveling, of her at events, of her living the life he never thought she was capable of. And it eats at him. I can see it in his eyes when he asks, the way they narrow slightly, the way his jaw tightens. He created the conditions for her metamorphosis and then had to watch it happen from the outside. That is a particular kind of torture that I do not think he will ever fully reconcile. I do not feel sorry for him. Maybe that makes me a bad daughter. But after 20 years of watching him neglect and deceive and manipulate the woman who gave up her entire identity to be his wife, I cannot summon sympathy for the consequences he earned. Looking back on everything that happened, from the shotgun wedding to the open marriage to the divorce to the emails to the settlement to the gym to the new relationship, I keep coming back to the same thought. My father's plan to escape his marriage and steal my mother's company was the single best thing that ever happened to our family. If he had never asked for the open marriage, my mother might have spent the rest of her life in that apartment, alone and invisible, married to a man who was never really there. She might have never discovered the gym, never built her confidence, never found the courage to stand up for herself. She might have died the same quiet, submissive woman she had been trained to be, never knowing what she was capable of, never knowing what she deserved. Instead, his cruelty became her catalyst. His manipulation became her motivation. His plan to break her became the thing that finally set her free. There is a lesson in this story, and it is not the one most people expect. The lesson is not that karma will get the bad guys and reward the good guys. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. The lesson is that the worst moments of your life can become the foundation for the best moments, if you let them. My mother did not choose what happened to her. She did not choose to be married off at 18 to a man who would betray her for 20 years. She did not choose the open marriage or the divorce or the public humiliation. But she chose what she did next. She chose to get strong. She chose to make friends. She chose to build a business and a life that belonged to her and no one else. That choice, the choice to grow instead of shrink, to rise instead of collapse, to turn pain into power, that is the most remarkable thing I have ever witnessed. And I am proud, every single day, to call the woman who made that choice my mother. To all the people who reached out 4 years ago when I first shared this story, thank you. My mother was overjoyed when I told her that strangers on the internet were rooting for her. She still talks about it sometimes, shaking her head in disbelief that people she has never met cared enough to send kind words during the hardest period of her life. She is doing more than okay now. She is thriving. And if my father is reading this, or hearing this, or if someone who knows him relays the message, I want him to know something. The quiet girl from the small town, the one he thought would never fight back, the one he dismissed and neglected and tried to manipulate out of her own company, she won. She won everything. And she did it without ever compromising who she is. That is the end of the story. But for my mother, it is really just the beginning. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that it is never too late to reinvent yourself, if it gave you hope that the worst chapter of your life does not have to be the last one, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. And hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next story. Subscribe for more stories.